your questions, and please include where you're from.
I am Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, and I am so deeply grateful to represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. We are here tonight with our first online town hall that we're streaming using all of our social media services. And so what we would like to ask is, if you are joining us by any one of our social media platforms, please put your questions in the chat for whatever platform that you're on, and our team will read those questions and send them to me so that I can help answer them. But let me just kick things off tonight by saying that we are now into week 2 of this government shutdown. I am here in Washington, D.C. As all of you know, I represent New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, which includes Albuquerque and 10 rural counties in central New Mexico. I'm a native New Mexican, born and raised. I care deeply about our communities, and I ran for Congress because I believe in New Mexico and our people and in our fight to build a future where every New Mexican can thrive. And I never thought that when I ran for office that I would find myself in a situation of having to defend the most basic tenets of our democracy, of having to fight to keep our government open, of having to fight to protect basic health care for New Mexicans. But this is where we're at. And I want to just take a moment to talk about how we got here, how we get out of it, and what we're doing to try to protect New Mexicans. So first of all, this is a shutdown that never had to happen. There is no reason for this shutdown to happen. The budget process is an annual process. Everyone knows the end of the fiscal year is on September 30th. The Republicans who are in control of the Senate, the House, and the White House knew that this deadline was coming, but they didn't finish their budget bills. Instead, they spent the first several months of this year passing a giant domestic policy bill, which slashed healthcare for millions of Americans. It made the largest cuts in Medicaid and Medicare in American history. It affects the healthcare under the Affordable Care Act for millions of Americans. It affects your assistance under Pell Grants and student loans. It affects food assistance for millions of Americans, including kicking millions of children off of food assistance. And it was all in service of giving permanent tax breaks to billionaires. Literally, that's what it was in service of. And because there was so much effort put into the work to pass that bill by our colleagues across the aisle, they failed to pass a regular operational budget for the United States government. And even while they were working on that big package that I just mentioned, they were illegally slashing and cutting programs, including a massive rescissions package that cut international assistance. They were, as many of you know, trying to shut down programs like those at Department of Education and CFPB and the Environmental Protection Agency. They tried to mass fire millions of Americans who work for the federal government and terminate contracts for Americans that were working for the federal government. And now, under this shutdown, they are trying to use the shutdown as a pretext to do what they tried to do illegally earlier this year. So let me just address a few frequently asked questions. And in particular, if you're a federal employee out there, we want you to know that you have rights. You cannot be fired during a shutdown. If you receive a RIF notice, we want you to know that even though the White House and the Office of Management and Budget and agencies have been threatening to conduct mass firings, that is a political game that they are engaging in at the White House, but they do not have the authority to conduct mass firings. And a lawsuit has already preemptively been filed by the unions for our federal workers, AFG, and other federal unions have already filed a lawsuit to ensure that the courts put a temporary restraining order against firings. Secondly, we know that the president claimed yesterday that he might try to withhold pay for federal workers. They cannot withhold your pay. After the last shutdown that happened in 2018 and 2019, there was a law passed here in Congress that guaranteed back pay for our federal workers. The president and his cabinet secretaries and OMB cannot withhold your pay. It is in the law. And so if you receive notice that your pay is going to be withheld and back pay is not going to be paid, or that you receive a RIF notice, you can either contact our office or you can contact your local of your union. But it's really important that you know as a federal worker that you have rights. Now, in terms of what the shutdown looks like, how it will conduct itself over the coming days, and what the outlook is, let us just say that we know there are literally hundreds of thousands of Americans, whether they're federal workers or troops, who are currently either working without pay or are on furlough. We know that for many of you, you are still being asked to come to work, whether that's our troops, it's FAA employees who are making sure that our planes are safe in the skies. And we want to say thank you to all of our federal workers out there. We've got your backs, and we are fighting to get the government reopened. Now, it looks like, based on statements that the Speaker of the House made earlier today, that they do not plan to reopen the House next week, which means that the government will remain shut down likely through next week. I want to explain that the House Republicans are trying to claim that they have nothing to negotiate on. That is simply not true. That is not true. The Speaker of the House has shut down the House. In fact, now for 2 weeks, he has canceled votes. He's refused to bring Republicans back to Washington, D.C. to vote. And Democrats have continued to show up. We are here in the Capitol. We are ready to negotiate. We are asking for a bipartisan agreement to get the government reopened and to fix healthcare premiums. But they have refused to show up. They are not even here on campus. In fact, we are being told that House Republicans have been told to not even speak to the public or to the press because Republican leadership is concerned that they're going to, in their own words, say something stupid. They basically are stonewalling the American people and stonewalling trying to get a compromise to reopen the government. And so because they control the House, because they control the Senate, and because they control the White House, we have very limited capability of getting things reopened if we don't have a negotiating partner who is willing to come to the table. But that said, we're going to keep showing up. We are dedicated to getting an agreement. We're going to keep fighting to reopen the government. We're going to keep fighting to fix the healthcare costs that got broken in the big ugly bill. And we're here to advocate and to support our community. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and take a pause. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this streaming session, if you have questions, if you have comments, please put them in the chat, and our staff is going to share them, and really look forward to hearing from all of you.
Congresswoman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So our first question is from Facebook. What can we as citizens do to push back against Trump's bad policies?
Yeah, well, right now there are many, many things that folks can do to push back against the administration's policies. This fight has to happen really on three fronts. It has to happen here in Congress, it has to happen in the courts, and it has to happen in our communities. In terms of what we can do here in Congress, as I mentioned, because the House is closed, because they've shut the government down, and because the Republicans who are serving in leadership have very much allied themselves with the president, there is not a lot of in earnest accountability and oversight happening here in Congress, which is obvious to anyone who's watching politics right now. But that is why it is especially important that we win back the House next year, because if we want real accountability, if we want investigations that can result in accountability for this administration for the many, many illegal and corrupt acts that they are conducting, we need to make sure that we have sidebars again here in Congress. And so one way that you can get involved right now is make sure that in your community and in the communities that your family and friends live in, that they are supporting candidates to run for Congress. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle, but candidates for Congress that are going to put sidebars on this president and rein in the abuse of power that we're seeing right now. Now, in terms of the courts, there are efforts on multiple fronts to try to rein in the lawless behavior, whether that is the illegal invasion of cities, the deployment of National Guard troops. There are now lawsuits in every state where the National Guard have been deployed or threatened to be deployed. There are lawsuits by our federal unions, as I mentioned, to protect federal workers. There are lawsuits by states that have seen their funding frozen and state level institutions and nonprofits. A lot of that is being brought by our unions, by nonprofit organizations, by our state attorney generals, and by an organization called Democracy Forward, as well as immigrant rights organizations like the ACLU and the Immigrant Law Center. So there's lots of ways to get involved in those important cases. Also, getting involved with local nonprofits that work on issues that you care about is an important way to get involved. And finally, the fight within our communities. I had the incredible honor to work during the first Obama administration in the White House Office of Management and Budget. And in that job, not only did I have a front row seat to see how the Office of Management and Budget and the White House operate, but also to hear the president speak on many occasions. And one of the things that I always appreciated is that he reminded us that democracy is an act. It's an everyday act that we have to do. It's like waking up and drinking coffee. And so if we want to see our democracy and our rights survive, we have to engage in acts of democracy every single day. And that means speaking up. It means speaking out. It means showing up for marches. It means writing op-eds to your local papers. It means being a leader in your own community, whether that's on your Facebook page or to your book club or with your friends and family, to help them understand what is happening in this moment and how these attacks on our basic rights not only affect you, but affect everyone in our community, and to mobilize that information into democratic acts as we head into the next election cycle. And I'll just say here also, if you're considering running for office, run for office, because our democracy and our communities really need you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So I know that you mentioned this at the top, but we have more questions coming in from folks who are impacted by the shutdown. And people are asking, can Trump refuse to back pay federal workers?
So the answer to that is no. Donald Trump in the Oval Office yesterday, during his time with reporters, reportedly said that he didn't know if everyone deserved back pay or if they were going to back pay all federal workers. Well, that's just not true. He does not have the authority to withhold federal worker back pay. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, after the historically long shutdown that he put into place during his first term in 2019, Congress passed a bill that required back pay for federal workers. So if you're a federal worker, you will get back pay. Now, do we think that the administration may try to push the limits on this? It's very possible that they will, because they're pushing the limits on their authority every single day. But as the law stands, the law says that they must back pay all federal workers.
Thank you. And more from folks impacted by the shutdown. Can the Trump administration mass fire federal staff during the shutdown?
Again, the administration does not have the authority to mass fire federal workers. There is a HR term in the federal government called reduction in force, or what they call RIF. And as a former OMB examiner, I'm very familiar with this authority. This is when the federal government, just like any business, is restructuring, they can think about how to restructure a program and decide, like, they need, more workers who have this skill set, and they're going to transition a program into, this. But the thing about how the federal government works is that it all has to be in alignment with the law, meaning whatever agencies or programs are enacted in law, they have to carry out their mandate as Congress passed those laws. Secondly, it has to be in alignment with the appropriations for those programs, meaning if Congress appropriated money to be spent for a program, whether that's forest firefighting, BIA law enforcement, a mining engineering program at BLM, FAA air traffic controllers, it is the requirement of the federal government to spend the money to carry out those programs. And so the president cannot mass fire people. And if he was to choose to do that, he would be violating not just one law, but many, many laws, because it would violate the appropriations, it would violate the authorizing language for those programs, it would create what's called anti-deficiency violations under the Budget Control Act. So not only would it violate one law, it would violate many laws. And that's part of why we have joined in supporting this preemptive lawsuit that was filed on the eve of the shutdown to prevent those RIF notices from going out. But again, if you're a federal worker and you receive a RIF notice, please contact my office or your union, because you are protected.
So there's some discussion in the chat about if the shutdown is really about free healthcare for undocumented immigrants. Can you address this?
This is just ridiculous. This is literally just a lie that the GOP has made up and is repeating over and over again. And of course, the president, the vice president, the Speaker of the House, and those Republican leaders who are going on TV and social media are repeating it over and over again. But just because they repeat it over and over again does not make it true. So let's talk about the facts. First of all, if you are an immigrant here in the United States and you do not have a legal status, you do not qualify for health care under these federal programs to begin with. And so for the Republicans to claim that somehow by addressing the healthcare costs for everyday Americans, that we are trying to just give away free healthcare to people who don't qualify for it, it's just a lie. They're literally just lying to the American people. What we are actually fighting for is to fix one of the many pieces of healthcare that got broken in the big ugly bill. And I want to just make this like super concrete for people. If you get healthcare insurance through the exchange, meaning you go on the New Mexico marketplace, for example, and you pay for your insurance. Before I was a member of Congress, I had a small business. I paid for my own insurance through the New Mexico exchange. I pay for it now through the DC exchange because I'm a federal worker here. But I was paying like $300 and some a month. We're now looking at premiums that could go up to as high as $600, $800, $1,000, $1,200 a month. And if we don't address this issue literally right now, you guys know open enrollment begins in the next several weeks. You are going to get notices from your insurance company that your healthcare has doubled or tripled. And, if you're a billionaire or you're Mike Johnson, maybe that's not a big deal to you. But for everyday Americans who are already struggling to buy groceries, to pay for rent, to put gas in their car, the idea of jacking up your health insurance rates by hundreds of dollars a month is literally going to cause millions of Americans to lose health insurance. It's going to cause millions of Americans to end up with even deeper economic crisis. And we know that for so many people that are living on the edge, that increase in cost could mean the difference between people losing their homes, people not being able to feed their children. And so this is not a hypothetical. We are literally fighting to address an urgent emergency around healthcare and costs to make sure that Americans don't fall off the edge.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So now lots of folks who are obviously paying attention are asking about Arizona Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva because Speaker Johnson will not swear her in. What options do Democrats have? Can a judge swear her in so that she can have a vote in the House?
So unfortunately not. As many of you know, Arizona had a special election 2 weeks ago, and my dear friend Adelita Grijalva was elected in an amazing landslide of an election. On a personal note, Adelita is an incredible progressive. She has worked in education her entire career. Her dad served as the chairman of the Natural Resources Committee. He was the first Chicano school board member in the Tucson school system in Tucson's history. She is an extraordinary member of Congress, and the people of Tucson and Southern Arizona got her elected, and it's time for her to be seated here in Congress. Now, part of why we think Mike Johnson has shut down the House, on one hand, he shut down the House so that they don't have to negotiate on a budget deal, because as long as we're not in session, there's no negotiation to be had. And so, for example, they keep saying like, oh, well, we'll negotiate after the government is reopened. You can't reopen the government if there's not a negotiation, which to us indicates that they want the shutdown. But there's this other issue, which is that Congresswoman-elect Grijalva has committed that she will sign on to a discharge petition that would force the House of Representatives to vote to release the Epstein files. Now, I want to make clear that we've already subpoenaed the Epstein files, and the Trump administration is not in compliance with the subpoena. The Department of Justice released a handful of files that had already been publicly released, but they have not released the vast majority of the files that we know exist in both the FBI, DOJ, and other agency files. And so they are desperately trying to not have to take a House floor vote on the Epstein files because Donald Trump has been threatening Republican members of Congress that if they vote for or put their name on that discharge petition, that he will consider that a hostile act. Now, we don't know in its entirety what's in those files, but what we do know is that the Department of Justice informed President Trump that he is in the Epstein files. We know this for a fact. And we don't know the nature of it. We don't know the extent of it. Of course, there's been a lot of lawsuits, both civil and at times criminal charges brought against the president for sexual assault and other crimes. But we know something's in there, and we know that part of why they are not bringing the House back, part of why they have not sworn in Adelita is because they are trying to basically shut down the discharge petition for the Epstein files. And this is exactly what they did when they canceled votes at the beginning of the August work period. So something's going on there, and we're demanding the House be reopened. But at the end of the day, the House is a winner-take-all situation. Whoever is in the majority controls the House. They control the Speaker, they control the rules of the House, and the Speaker controls the floor schedule, the votes, and basically what actions can be taken in the House. And so as long as the Speaker is acting as defense for the president on the Epstein files, there is nothing we can do short of putting public pressure on our Republican colleagues to demand the release of the Epstein files and the seating of Adelita to get the House reopened and to have that vote taken. So an important action that we're encouraging people to do is to contact Republican members of Congress and to make your views known on all of these issues.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And now on the Epstein files, how can we help Congress do more? And when will the Republicans join Democrats to hold Trump accountable?
Yeah, well, we are engaged in a now months-long investigation in the Epstein case. And because the Democrats in the House forcefully throughout the summer continued to issue subpoenas and other requests for information, we were ultimately able to get formal subpoenas issued in the Epstein case through the Oversight Committee. So we have now subpoenaed the files from the administration. We've subpoenaed the files from the Epstein estate. We've subpoenaed multiple witnesses to come testify under oath, including Alex Acosta, who was the prosecutor at DOJ who chose not to prosecute Epstein, and that's what resulted in him getting work release and continuing to abuse children. And so we are conducting, which on the surface is a bipartisan investigation. The problem is that the Republicans are using this as a smokescreen, essentially, to say, look, we're engaging in the investigation while giving cover to the White House, who's refusing to produce documents. But what I can tell you is that even just over the last week and a half, the Epstein estate has released more documents. We just got another tranche of documents, which revealed the personal records, flight logs, and contact information that Epstein kept on his person, which includes and implicates key allies of the president. Steve Bannon is mentioned in those files, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. So we know that not only is Trump obviously shielding himself, but a lot of his major allies and donors are also implicated in these files. So one way that the public can help is, if you have information, please bring it forward, bring it to the House Oversight Dems. We are still collecting evidence. We know that there are still potentially hundreds of victims and survivors out there who've not come forward and told their stories. If you are a survivor and would like to tell your story either in confidence or publicly, we are taking that testimony. And we also know that there are many, many people that worked for Jeffrey Epstein that observed these crimes happen over the several decades that he engaged in them. And so just like any criminal investigation, if you have information, please bring it forward.
Thank you. Now, a lot of people are asking about holding Trump accountable in the courts. As Trump continues to ignore the laws, can you talk a little about using the courts to overturn Trump's legal actions and the challenges with the Supreme Court?
Yeah. So by and large, the courts have ruled in favor of the Constitution and the American people. But what is confusing right now is that there are now hundreds of court cases on different individual issues. So name an issue: the invasion of cities, the deployment of National Guard, the illegal deportation of individuals who are Americans or who have not committed crimes, the freezing of federal funds, the mass firings. It just goes on and on and on. There's hundreds and hundreds of lawsuits. And normally, the law enforcement agency for the federal government is the Department of Justice. And not since Richard Nixon have we seen a DOJ that is so compromised in its core mission of law enforcement. And in fact, obviously, President Trump is just using DOJ as a personal tool to go after his enemies and to try to intimidate and scare people and to give him unchecked authority. But the reason why I bring up DOJ is that the challenge in the courts is that most of the crimes that he's committing are federal crimes. And so the law enforcement agency that normally would pursue federal crimes and charges against someone breaking the law is the U.S. Department of Justice. And so because DOJ is not only not prosecuting crimes, but enabling Trump's crimes, that means that these cases are having to be brought by states, by tribes, by nonprofits, by individuals, and parties who are experiencing harm as a result of it. And in the vast majority of the cases, when they have gone to a federal district court, these judges, whether they're appointed by Trump or Bush or Obama or Biden, overwhelmingly are finding on the substance of these cases that the president and his administration are breaking the law. Now, the Supreme Court has chosen to take up limited appeals on many of these cases to consider whether or not temporary restraining orders that the lower courts have put into place should stand. And in many of the higher profile cases that you've heard on the shadow docket over the last several weeks and months, the Supreme Court has essentially said, we're not going to rule on the substance of this issue. We're going to wait for the lower court to, continue its findings or continue to hear this case or let it go through the appeal process, but we will remove the restraining order. And so we've seen this in a number of cases where that has essentially allowed the administration then to do the bad thing that it was blocked from doing in the lower court. The Supreme Court has now announced, as they're heading into their next real session, many of the cases that they plan to take up this next year that will actually be on the substance of these cases. And I'm going to be honest with all of you, I'm very frightened. This includes voting rights. It includes questions about presidential authority. It includes appropriations laws, things that are really at the heart of what the president is doing. And based on what we've seen with these temporary rulings under these emergency orders, I am deeply, deeply concerned that the Supreme Court is so politically compromised that they are going to continue to undermine our Constitution and the rule of law. And so that means that, in the three checks and balances of our government, if the administration is not going to police itself, if the Supreme Court is not going to ultimately uphold the law and the Constitution, it is going to fall on Congress, the people's house, to stop them. And so that is why there's such a heavy emphasis on we have to take back the House. We have to put guardrails once again around this presidency, and we have to continue to put pressure on our colleagues across the aisle to find their backbone to stand up against this administration. We have members in this chamber who 4 years ago, 6 years ago, saw things happening that they knew were wrong, and they called the president, they texted the president, they stood up, they made public statements, and we are not seeing that kind of action right now. And so that's where it falls on us as members of the public, and for me as a fellow congressperson, to continue to put pressure on our colleagues to do their sworn oath and to do their constitutional duty to check this unchecked power. Now, I know that feels in many ways completely overwhelming, but we don't have any other choice. We have one democracy, we have one voice, and we just have to continue to do the work every day. And I will say that, every day we see rays of hope, I think, cutting through, even in this fight over the shutdown. I think the American people understand that our fight to get the government reopened, to save healthcare, and to protect our democracy requires everyone to stand up and speak out.
Thank you. Now, let's take it back to the shutdown for a minute. For argument's sake, can you talk about why Democrats won't just vote to reopen the government and then ask Republicans to fix healthcare?
So, first of all, I'm just going to go back to the basic mechanics. The Republicans control the process, and they are the ones that have shut down the House and the government. They shut it down. We didn't shut it down. In the Senate right now, the Senate has, under Thune's leadership, under Republican leadership, is literally voting on the same CR, the same 7-week CR over and over and over again. That CR, even if it was to be adopted today, would expire in a few weeks, and we would be in the exact same place that we are today. And so the idea that we have to reopen the government before we negotiate is literally nonsensical. It literally is not how the process works. The way that it works is that if you need the votes to pass a bill and to get a deal, you negotiate. It's just really that simple. And so if the Republicans actually wanted to keep the government open, if they really wanted to make sure that everything was funded, they would actually be in Washington, D.C., and the House would be open, but they shut it down. They're not even here.
Congresswoman, folks are asking about congressional pay during a shutdown. As a federal employee yourself, can you share if you're being paid?
I am not. I chose to not take my paycheck right now. And I just think that that's an important way of showing solidarity. And, all of us are here in my office. We are essentially furloughed federal workers, but we are here working every single day without pay in my office, answering the phones, responding to constituents, and doing the work.
When will Congress stand up and stop the president from wasting millions of dollars on these false deployments? He cannot do that he can't do that without the power of the purse, right?
So this is an interesting question, to pose it as an appropriations question. The answer to this question is that the deployments are just illegal, period. And so in the 5 places now where the president has tried to deploy the National Guard, it has really fallen on the states to file court cases against the administration. So let me explain. In the case of California, as you know, months ago, the president deployed both the National Guard and the Marines. The governor was very clear. He did not want them deployed in California. That violated state law, and it violated his federal rights to deploy our troops. California won that case, and so the president had to pull troops out of California. The president then tried to use Washington, D.C. as a deployment spot because of the nature of Washington, D.C.'s federal home rule laws. It did allow 4 weeks of deployment, but not permanent deployment. And the way in which the president deployed violated the law. So the city of Washington, D.C. sued the federal government, and that case is currently in the courts. The president is trying to deploy National Guard to Portland. A judge just 2 days ago issued a court injunction against the president. That restraining order says that the president cannot legally deploy troops. Of course, he's challenging that, and the same is going on in Chicago. So in terms of these deployments, they are being challenged in the courts under the lack of state and federal authority to do that. But again, the appropriations aspect of it, the government is shut down right now. And so it's an interesting question. Our troops aren't getting paid at all right now. And so, how is the president paying for the deployment during the shutdown is a question that we most definitely need to be investigating.
Congresswoman, of all the questions, many people have asked about impeaching Trump. Can you tell us more about that process and if there's any chance that we can hold this president accountable through the impeachment process?
Yeah, it's important to understand that impeachment is a congressional process. So, if you guys remember back to your high school civics, impeachment is essentially the House has an investigation and then the Senate convicts. And so the impeachment is inherently a congressional process. And just like I said a few moments ago, in the House, it's a winner take all situation. So whoever is in the majority controls the House. They control the schedule, they control the floor, they control the votes, and they control the rules. And so even if another motion to investigate the president for an impeachment proceeding was brought to the House floor, the Republicans would shut it down. And we already know that because they already did. And so we know that the president is breaking the law now daily, and there are numerous grounds for investigating the president and others in his orbit for illegal activity and high crimes and misdemeanors. But until the House is in the power of the people again, we are not going to be able to proceed with a formal investigation, more or less a prosecution in the Senate. And so impeachment is a congressional process. So that will require having a House that is actually willing to investigate the president. So again, this is why the midterms in, about a year, what is it now? I think we're 13 months out from the next election is so crucial.
Congresswoman, we've talked about a lot of hard things tonight. And for the last question, can you talk to those who might not be so well represented in a district like yours, who might be wondering if calling their representative actually works?
Yeah, so you have to keep calling. I have a colleague from Florida who's a dear friend, Representative Lois Frankel, and I was doing a town hall with her a few months ago, and she said, silence is deadly. History tells us silence is deadly. When you see abuse of power, if you do not speak up, speak out, and take a stand, then you will lose everything. And so we can't stop being loud. We have to continue to speak out. So that means making the calls, sending the letters, showing up to the protests, exercising your First Amendment rights, telling your representatives how you feel about what they're doing. And frankly, if you are in the position to do so, to run against them or to support a candidate who's running against them. So, we cannot be silent. You have to keep speaking out. That is just crucial in this moment when so much is on the line.
And on that note, that's our last question. So if you'd like to give any closing remarks, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I think where I'll leave things for folks is that I know it feels like such a scary and uncertain and perilous time. But what I want you to know is that there are countless representatives here in Congress. Today we had a hearing all day on the Democratic side. Our Republican colleagues didn't show up, but about the shutdown, about healthcare, and about our constituents. And there are people here who care deeply about our country, about our democracy, that are in this fight, that are showing up and doing the work every day. And I know that there are millions of Americans out there who feel exactly the way that all of you out there are feeling right now. And so we have to continue to support each other. We have to continue to get involved. And of course, as Michelle Obama says, just do something. Whatever it is, do something, because the future of our democracy depends on it. And I have hope that the American spirit will prevail, and our country has been through dark days, but we're going to get through this difficult time. And if you need anything at all, you can contact my office. We're here to help you. Please contact us. And if you need anything at all, know that we're here to serve you. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and continue to have hope.